I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. I needed the escape, the silence of the woods, the chance to be completely alone with nothing but the trees, the wind, and the stars. I had done plenty of camping before, but this time I wanted something deeper, more remote, somewhere far from other people, from the constant hum of civilization. The spot I picked was a forest that stretched for miles, dense with pines and maples, intersected by a few narrow dirt trails that were barely maintained. Maps said it had some old logging roads, but most of the area was wild and largely untouched. Felt perfect. I drove in during the late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long golden slants of light through the trees as I followed the winding dirt road deeper into the forest. My backpack was heavy, filled with the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, first aid kit, fire-starting tools, extra clothing, and a small camping stove. I had my map, compass, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I had even packed a small axe. I prided myself on being prepared. When I finally parked at a spot where the road seemed to vanish into nothing but thick trees, I felt a thrill of isolation wash over me. There was no one around. No cars, no hikers, no sounds of human activity at all. Only birds, insects, and the rustling of leaves. The air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. I checked my map and compass and began walking down a narrow, nearly invisible trail I had found. It was overgrown in places, and I had to push branches aside, duck under low limbs, and step over fallen logs. I wanted a campsite near water, so I headed downhill, following the sound of a stream I could faintly hear. The trail became rougher as I descended. Roots snaked across the path, rocks jutted up, and the ground was uneven and slippery from the recent rain. By the time I reached the small creek, the sun was already touching the horizon. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones, small ripples catching what little light remained. I decided this would be my spot. It was secluded, flat enough to pitch a tent, and had a ready source of water. I set up my tent as quickly as I could before darkness fully arrived. The process was familiar, almost comforting. The stretching of the tent poles, securing the stakes, checking the fly cover against potential rain. By the time I finished, the forest was fully dark. I lit a small campfire, letting the flames crackle and the smoke rise. I cooked a simple meal on my camping stove, ate and cleaned up, making sure no food scraps were left behind that could attract wildlife. After eating, I sat near the fire for a while, just listening. The forest sounded different at night. The daytime birds were gone, replaced by insects, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The darkness felt thick, almost tangible. My fire was small, providing light and warmth, but beyond it, everything faded into deep shadows. It was then I noticed the smell, something faint, metallic, like iron. I paused, sniffing the air. It was subtle at first, easily dismissible, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I scanned the tree line, straining my eyes against the dark. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the soil and vegetation near the stream. I forced myself to relax, reminding myself I had been alone in forests before and nothing had ever happened. I crawled into my sleeping bag later, letting the warmth envelope me. The sound of the stream was calming, and I drifted towards sleep. But the forest had a way of making every small sound feel amplified at night. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, small animals moving too close. I lay awake longer than usual, eyes wide, ears straining for any unusual noises. Then I heard it, a deliberate crunch, not like the random sounds of forest life. Something was moving toward my campsite, slow, careful, measured. My stomach sank. I sat up, ears straining. The firelight barely reached beyond the tent, and I realized I could barely see anything at all. My heart began to race. I told myself it could be an animal, a deer, maybe a raccoon, but the pace was too steady, too deliberate for that. I debated whether to get my flashlight, but the thought of stepping outside into the dark, unknown space made my hands tremble. I held my breath, listening. The crunching sound came again, closer this time, moving along the perimeter of my firelight. Something was circling, I could hear the sound of footsteps moving through underbrush, the occasional breaking of a branch under weight. I tried to remain calm, thinking logically. If it was an animal, it would probably leave, but if it was a person, that was another story. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here, and I was too deep into the forest for a random stranger to stumble across me by accident. The thought was unsettling. Hours seemed to stretch. The footsteps would stop for a while, then start again. Couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. I made sure my knife was within reach, my phone on airplane mode but flashlight function ready. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow seemed alive. I didn't hear any talking, just the movement, circling, as if someone or something was watching. At one point, the fire went out. I had underestimated the wind. Darkness fell completely. My heart raced, my senses heightened. I could hear something moving closer to my tent. Then I heard it. The rustle of fabric, a deliberate step right at the edge of my tent flap. My breath caught. Whoever or whatever was out there was standing still, listening. I gripped my knife, ready to defend myself. I realized there was only one safe way to handle this. I couldn't run blindly into the forest. It would be a trap. I needed to wait for a moment of certainty. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it straight at the sound. Nothing. The beam illuminated empty space, but I could hear the footsteps retreat, slow and cautious, moving away. I stayed frozen, listening until the noise faded completely. Then I carefully checked around the campsite, walking in small circles with the light. I found nothing unusual, no footprints, no objects left behind. Only the disturbed ground where the visitor had paused near my tent. I stayed awake the rest of the night, crouched near the fire with my knife in hand. Dawn came slowly, the gray light of morning seeping through the trees. I could finally see my surroundings in full. Nothing appeared out of place. The forest calm and serene under daylight. The earlier tension was replaced by cautious relief. I packed up my camp quickly, making sure everything was secure and nothing was left behind, and started hiking back toward my car. The hike back was tense but uneventful. I kept checking the tree line, half expecting to see someone following me. But the forest was silent, empty, as if the previous night had been a test of endurance and nerves. When I reached my car, relief washed over me. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror at the receding trees. I never went back to that spot, and I never told anyone the exact location. The forest had reminded me of something important. Even in familiar, controlled activities, nature and people can be unpredictable. I had survived the night without injury, but it left a mark, a reminder that isolation carries risks that preparation alone cannot eliminate. The story could have ended with fear and paranoia, but it ended with something more important: awareness, caution, and respect for the unknown. I returned home safely, but the memory of circling footsteps in darkness beyond my fire stayed with me for a long time, shaping the way I approached wilderness adventures in the future. I had always loved camping alone, away from people, away from noise. There was something about the forest, the way it smelled after rain, the way the wind whispered through the trees, that felt pure and grounding. That weekend, I decided to try a new spot, deeper into the forest than I had ever gone before. I had studied the map and found a small clearing near a narrow creek. The trail was rough, barely visible in places, and it had taken me hours to reach it. By the time I arrived, the sun was already leaning low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. The clearing was small, just enough room for my tent and a little fire pit I could build. I dropped my backpack and looked around, noticing the forest thickened all around me, with tall pines and oaks rising like silent, unmoving watchers. The air smelled damp and earthy. I set up my tent quickly, hammering the stakes into the ground, and then collected wood for a fire. The branches were wet, but I found some dry pieces under the roots of fallen trees. As the sun sank lower, the forest darkened rapidly. I managed to get the fire going with a match and some dry kindling, the smoke curling up into the fading light. It was peaceful, almost perfect. I cooked a simple meal over the fire and sat quietly, listening to the sounds around me. Birds were finishing their calls, insects were starting their evening songs, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the soft murmur of water from the creek. Everything seemed normal, but as night settled, I noticed how every little sound became more distinct. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the occasional thump that could have been an animal moving through the underbrush. My senses sharpened. I had been camping long enough to know the forest could be beautiful and serene, but also unpredictable. After eating, I cleaned up and made sure my fire was stable. I had my flashlight and extra batteries in the tent, and I had my knife and a small first aid kit in my pack. I lay down on my sleeping pad, listening to the night, thinking I was prepared for anything. But something about this forest felt different. The trees seemed closer together, the shadows darker, and the quiet deeper than I expected. It wasn't a feeling of ghosts or fairy tale fears. It was purely the sense that I was utterly alone, and nature didn't care about me at all. Around midnight, I was woken by a sound that made my stomach tighten. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper of movement, a dragging or shuffling that seemed to come from just beyond the tree line. I froze, listening. My tent rustled in the breeze, but this was different. The sound was deliberate, measured, like something large moving slowly over dry leaves and sticks. My flashlight was across the tent. I could reach it without making much noise. I grabbed it and turned it on, scanning the clearing and the edges of the forest. Nothing. I thought maybe it was a deer or a raccoon. I had seen plenty of animals on solo trips, and they rarely worried me. But the sound returned, closer this time, and unmistakably deliberate. I could hear heavy footsteps stepping on twigs, each one slow, heavy, careful. My stomach twisted. I was in the middle of the forest, far from roads, far from other people. I considered grabbing my pack and hiking out immediately, but the trail back would take hours, and it was pitch dark now. I wasn't sure if I should stay completely still or make myself visible. My heart pounded in my chest. I switched off the flashlight and waited. The sound stopped. I held my breath. After what felt like 10 minutes, I cautiously peeked through the tent's mesh window. The moon had risen high, faintly lighting the forest floor. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of the clearing, a shadow moved. It wasn't fast, but deliberate. I couldn't make out what it was. Maybe a bear, maybe a human. But whatever it was standing at the boundary of the clearing, watching, just beyond the light of my fire, which had dimmed. I didn't dare make a sound. I stayed that way for an hour, every noise amplified. I thought about leaving quietly, but I would have to cross that dark forest where I knew I couldn't see obstacles or hazards. If it was a human, they could see me long before I saw them. If it was an animal, I didn't want to startle it. Eventually, the movement stopped, and I convinced myself it must have left. I kept my flashlight close and my knife in hand, and I tried to sleep sitting up, leaning against my pack. I didn't close my eyes fully. Around 3 a.m., I woke again. This time, the sound wasn't outside. It was inside the clearing, closer to my tent. I froze and listened. The sound was small at first, a soft scratching near the fire. I realized someone or something was inside the small perimeter I had built. My mind raced. Bears don't walk on two legs or quietly drag their paws across the ground without snapping twigs. But humans could. And the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just scared of an animal. I was scared of being confronted by someone. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the sound. There, at the edge of the clearing, I saw the faint outline of a figure crouched low. They weren't moving fast, weren't running, just crouched like they were watching. My heart hit my throat. I considered yelling, but the thought of provoking them terrified me. I reached slowly for my pack, planning to grab my bear spray. Every second felt like a minute. The figure didn't move. I waited, trying to stay calm. After what felt like forever, I realized they were circling the clearing slowly, staying just outside my firelight. My mind tried to reason. Maybe it was a lost hiker, maybe someone needing help, but every instinct screamed danger. I decided I couldn't stay in the tent any longer. I packed my essentials quietly, keeping the flashlight low. I moved toward the trail, crouching and staying near the trees, trying to use the shadows as cover. The figure was moving too, always at the edge of the clearing, keeping pace with me. My pulse was insane, my hands trembling. I followed the faint trail I had taken earlier. Every branch I stepped on seemed to crack too loudly. I focused on the sound of the creek, hoping it would lead me somewhere familiar. The forest seemed endless, every bend in the trail looking the same as the last. My legs burned from the uphill climb and the weight of my backpack. I thought about running, but I couldn't risk making noise. Hours passed, or maybe it was just an eternity. I kept moving quietly, using the faint moonlight to guide me. At some point, I stumbled across another small creek, wider than the first. I remembered this from the map. If I followed it downstream, it would lead to a ranger station near a road. Relief surged, but I kept moving cautiously, listening for any sound behind me. Every rustle made my blood run cold. I didn't look back. By dawn, the forest began to lighten. I was exhausted, soaked from wading through parts of the creek to avoid the trail, hungry and terrified. I finally spotted a small dirt road in the distance. I ran toward it, stumbling on rocks and roots. Once I reached it, I could see tire tracks and footprints, proof I wasn't imagining things. I kept running until I reached a small ranger station. I explained my situation as best I could. They took me seriously, and a patrol went back into the forest, but by the time they returned, there was no trace of whoever or whatever had been watching me. I had been planning the camping trip for months. I wanted to escape the noise of the city, the constant buzzing of my phone, and the endless pressure of work. I imagined quiet nights, the smell of pine and wet earth, the sound of a creek running nearby, and the cold bite of the night air. I packed carefully, double-checked every piece of gear, and left early on a Thursday morning, carrying only the essentials. A sturdy tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a small stove, water bottles, a first aid kit, a flashlight with spare batteries, a pocket knife, and a map of the area I intended to explore. The forest I chose was dense, old, and mostly untouched. It had a reputation among hikers for being beautiful but tricky. Its trails often disappeared, and people occasionally got lost if they strayed from the main paths. That part was what excited me the most. The thought of being deep inside, alone, without anyone else around. The first day went smoothly. I parked at the trailhead just after dawn, shouldered my backpack, and began hiking. The path was narrow and rocky, winding between thick trees and underbrush. Birds called in the canopy above, and small animals darted through the leaves. I moved slowly, taking care to notice every detail. The patterns of bark on trees, the way the sunlight dappled the forest floor, the moss clinging to rocks. Every so often, I paused to drink water, check the map, or snap photos of things that caught my attention. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing near a stream. The water was clear, rushing over rocks, and I decided to make camp there. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground, far enough from the stream to avoid the damp, but close enough that I could hear the water at night. I unpacked my small stove, boiled water for dinner, and ate a simple meal of rice and canned beans. By the time I finished, the sky was tinged with the orange and pink of sunset. The first night was peaceful. The air was crisp and cool, the sounds of the forest soothing rather than threatening. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees, and felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. But even as I drifted towards sleep, I noticed something unusual. Distant, muffled sounds that didn't belong to the usual wildlife. They were faint, irregular, almost like footsteps or branches snapping, but they didn't follow the rhythm of any animal I knew. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a deer moving through the brush. I drifted off, convincing myself I was imagining it. The next morning, I woke early, feeling rested but alert. I had planned to explore deeper into the forest. I packed my gear, made sure the tent was secured, and followed a narrow, less marked trail that seemed to lead uphill. The air grew cooler as I climbed, and the canopy above thickened, making the forest feel darker even in daylight. By midday, I reached an area that looked like no one had been there for years. Fallen trees blocked parts of the trail, vines and roots tangled across the ground, and I had to push through underbrush to continue. I felt exhilaration, the thrill of being somewhere untouched, and I reminded myself to keep track of landmarks so I could find my way back. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the soft earth along the trail. At first, I thought they were animal tracks, but their shape and size were unmistakably human. They were fresh too, less than a day old, judging by the softness of the impressions. I paused, listening carefully. The forest seemed unervingly silent now. No birds, no rustling of small animals, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant trickle of a creek. I decided to keep moving. Maybe someone else was camping nearby, or maybe a hiker had passed through recently. But as I continued, I realized the footprints weren't following the trail. They veered off into the denser part of the forest, crisscrossing in patterns that made no sense for a normal hiker. I took a photo of the tracks, thinking I might report them later if they worried me. By late afternoon, I reached a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Endless green forest stretching as far as I could see, dotted with streams reflecting the sunlight. I rested, drank some water, and considered my next steps. I had planned to hike down into the valley and set up camp there, closer to the water for the night. But as I checked my map, I realized I had lost the trail. The markers I thought I could follow were nowhere to be seen. I backtracked, trying to find any signs of the main path, but the forest had swallowed it entirely. Every turn looked the same, every tree seemed identical. My map became less useful as I struggled to orient myself. Panic began to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered my training. Stay put if lost, conserve energy, signal for help if necessary. I set up my tent on a small flat patch of ground near a cluster of pines. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I ate a small snack, boiled water, and tried to relax. The forest felt different now, closer, more oppressive. Shadows seemed longer, noises sharper. I kept hearing movement just beyond my line of sight. Rustling leaves, snapping branches, whispers of sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The night was long and tense. Every small noise startled me. I lay awake, listening to the forest, straining to hear anything clearly. At one point, I thought I heard a human voice, muffled and distant. But when I opened the tent and shone my flashlight into the trees, there was nothing. I told myself it was the wind again or my imagination. But sleep was impossible. At dawn, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find a way back to a known trail. I packed my gear, keeping my knife close, and set off. I chose a direction based on the position of the sun and the slope of the land, hoping it would lead me downhill. Hours passed. I climbed over fallen trees, waded through shallow streams, and pushed through thick underbrush. I became painfully aware of how far from civilization I was. My water supply was dwindling, my stomach growled, and my legs ached. By late morning, I stumbled upon signs of human presence again. An abandoned campsite. It looked old, perhaps a week or two, but there were remnants of a fire pit, tattered plastic containers, and footprints leading away in multiple directions. I studied the area carefully, trying to determine which path might lead back to the trailhead. My gut told me to follow the faintest signs of recent movement, the prints that were slightly softer, suggesting they were newer. As I moved, I noticed something terrifying. The footprints I had seen the previous day weren't alone. They seemed to follow me. Every time I paused, I could see fresh prints a short distance behind me. I began to realize I was being tracked. My heart raced, and my thoughts turned frantically to survival. I knew there was no one else in this forest who had permission to be so close. I had to put distance between myself and whoever or whatever was following. I increased my pace, moving carefully but quickly. I climbed steep hills, pushed through brambles, and tried to stay quiet. My water bottle rattled against my pack, every sound magnified in the still forest. Sweat poured down my back, and my arms ached from constant exertion. I kept glancing behind me. The prints were still there, no matter how far I ran. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion hit me hard. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burned, and my vision blurred from sweat and fatigue. I had to rest. I found a shallow hollow under a large tree, crouched low and hid. I listened. The forest was quiet now, almost unnaturally so. Minutes passed, then hours, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The tracks behind me had stopped, but I had no way of knowing if it was a trap or if whoever had been following me had given up. I waited until the forest darkened, relying on the faint light of dusk to guide me. I moved cautiously, using the sounds of the creek to navigate. Every shadow, every snap of a twig, sent my heart into my throat. My senses were sharpened to a painful degree. I couldn't afford mistakes. I had been planning this camping trip for months, thinking it would be a simple break from the city. A few days in the mountains with nothing but the sounds of nature and my own thoughts. I packed carefully, double-checking my gear. A small tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, a first aid kit, food that could last 3 days, a large water bottle, a map, a compass, and my phone, even though I knew reception would be unreliable. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. I wanted solitude, a break from everyone, from all the noise. I told myself I was prepared for anything, but as I drove away from the last gas station and into winding mountain roads, I already felt a strange tension in my chest, the kind that creeps up slowly when you know you're walking into a place where control is limited. I reached the trailhead just as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, leaving long shadows across the forest floor. The air was cool and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine. I parked, slung my backpack on, and set off, following the dirt trail that twisted through thick trees and occasional clearings. Birds were quiet, almost absent, and the wind whispered through the branches. The trail climbed gradually, and with each step, I felt more isolated, though I told myself it was exactly what I wanted. After about an hour, I found a small clearing near a shallow stream. The ground was soft with pine needles, flat enough to set up a tent. I worked quickly, driving stakes into the soil, unfurling the sleeping bag, and arranging my gear. I filled my water bottle at the stream, filtering it carefully, and prepared a simple meal of granola bars and trail mix. By the time I finished, the sky had turned dark blue, almost black, and I could see the first stars shining through the gaps in the canopy. I lit a small campfire. I knew the forest could be dangerous, and the fire made me feel less alone. Its warmth was comforting against the growing chill. I watched the flames, letting them hypnotize me, listening to the crackle and pop of burning wood. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. My heart jumped, but I told myself it was an animal, deer or raccoon, nothing dangerous. I had been in forests before. I knew the sounds. Yet, despite knowing it, unease settled deeper in my chest. I crawled into my tent when the fire had burned low, arranging my sleeping bag so it felt snug around me. The air was cooler than I expected, and I zipped the tent flap carefully. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling of the tent, trying to calm my mind. That's when I first heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, but deliberate, measured. The snapping of twigs, the crunching of leaves. It was close, too close. I froze, listening. I knew I was alone, or so I thought. I had seen no one on the trail. I had heard no voices. My stomach twisted. Whoever or whatever it was circling the clearing. I strained to see through the tent mesh, but the darkness made it impossible. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate and slow, as if someone was walking right around me. Panic began to rise, but I forced myself to think. I had a knife in my backpack and a small flashlight. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent a few inches and pointed the flashlight outside. The beam caught nothing but shadows and swaying branches. I held my breath, hoping it was just an animal, but the sound didn't stop. It moved, circling again. It was heavier than a deer, slower than a raccoon. The realization hit me that it could be a person. I tried to calm myself, telling myself not to make noise, to stay put. My phone was inside, but no signal. I couldn't call for help. My options were limited. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but running blindly into the dark forest was almost certainly worse. I decided to wait, silently hoping whoever or whatever was there would leave. Time passed slowly. Each minute stretched endlessly. The forest seemed alive now, every sound amplified. The rustle of leaves, the creak of trees, the low hum of insects. And the footfalls continued, slow, methodical, deliberate. They were circling, keeping distance, but never leaving. I realized I had left my food outside. A piece of my bag of trail mix had fallen. My stomach sank. Could someone be watching me for it? Or was it just an animal drawn to it? The sound came again, a crackling just beyond my tent. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Someone intending to steal from me, or worse. I had no weapon ready except my knife, which felt helpless in the shadowy forest. Hours passed. Darkness pressed in from all sides. Sleep was impossible. Eventually, the first pale light of dawn crept through the trees. I dared to unzip the tent fully, peeking outside. The clearing was empty. No footprints, no evidence of anyone else. My heart was still racing, but the immediate threat seemed gone. I packed my things quickly, deciding to abandon my original plan of a multi-day stay. As I walked down the trail, I remained hyper-aware, scanning constantly, listening to the smallest sound. By mid-morning, I reached my car. Relief washed over me. I locked the doors and sat for a moment, shaking, trying to calm my racing mind. I didn't see anyone around. The forest was quiet again, normal. I drove home slowly, still on edge. The next few days, I couldn't shake the memory. The feeling of being watched, the circling footsteps, the darkness pressing in. I realized how vulnerable I had been. I had survived, but only by staying still, by not panicking, by waiting. That alone had saved me. I had no evidence of anyone being there, but the terror was real, and it had changed me. From then on, I always told someone where I was going. I carried a whistle, a personal alarm, and more ways to communicate. I avoided camping alone in remote areas, and I became acutely aware that wilderness isn't only dangerous because of animals or the weather. It's dangerous because people can be there too, unseen, for reasons you can't control or predict. I never forgot that night. The forest had seemed inviting, peaceful, serene, but the reality was that it could conceal danger, real human danger. I survived because I stayed calm, careful, and alert, and that knowledge stayed with me. Nature is beautiful, but solitude carries risk, and preparation isn't only about supplies. It's about strategy, awareness, and respect for what you cannot see. I had planned this camping trip for months, carefully mapping out a remote section of forest several hours away from the nearest town. I needed to get away from everything, the noise, the people, the constant pressure of work and life. I had my backpack packed days in advance. A tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, food supplies, water, a first aid kit, a flashlight with spare batteries, a small camping stove, and a hatchet. I had double-checked my gear over and over. The night before the trip, I barely slept, tossing and turning, thinking about the hike ahead and imagining the dense trees, the smell of damp earth, and the quiet of being completely alone. I drove for hours, the asphalt stretching straight and empty in the fading afternoon light. The sun was dropping low behind distant hills, casting long shadows across the road. I could feel the tension in my chest easing a little as I left the last traces of civilization behind. I reached the trailhead as the sky turned pink and purple, parked my car, and unloaded my backpack. The forest ahead was thick and dark, with tall pines standing like silent sentinels. I started down the trail, my boots crunching over dry leaves, twigs snapping under my steps. The forest smelled of pine resin and wet earth. Birds chirped above, but the further I went, the quieter it became. I followed the trail for hours, feeling a growing sense of isolation. The map I had printed showed a small clearing along a river, about 10 miles in, which I planned to use as my campsite. The trail was overgrown in places, forcing me to push branches aside, and I had to step over fallen logs. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the forest became dim, and I flicked on my flashlight. Shadows danced around me, and I felt my pulse quicken. I told myself it was normal, that the fear was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. After what felt like forever, I found the clearing. A small river ran along one side, its water moving steadily over smooth rocks. The ground was mostly flat, with enough room to pitch my tent. I set up camp, carefully securing the tent stakes, laying out my sleeping bag, and preparing a small fire pit with stones. The first chill of evening settled in, and I was grateful for the small warmth of the fire. I cooked a simple dinner, beans and rice, listening to the water ripple and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The forest was quiet, but there was a constant undercurrent of subtle noises. The crack of a branch somewhere deeper in the woods, the distant sound of an animal moving through the underbrush. I told myself it was just a deer or a fox. Night fell fully, and the forest darkened into near blackness beyond the small circle of my campfire. I lay on my sleeping bag, staring at the star-filled sky through the small opening of my tent, trying to relax. The sounds of the night surrounded me. Frogs croaking near the river, owls hooting, leaves rustling. But as the hours passed, I noticed a new sound, soft, slow crunching steps on dry leaves. It didn't sound like a deer or a fox. The rhythm was irregular, hesitant, deliberate, and unnervingly close. I froze, listening, holding my breath. The firelight barely reached the edge of the clearing, and the noise seemed to circle me, moving just outside the fire's glow. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but saw nothing. I reminded myself that wild animals were normal, that humans were unlikely this deep in the forest at night, but the sound kept me on edge. The rustling continued sporadically, never stopping completely. I tried to stay calm, telling myself to just stay in the tent and wait for morning. I stuffed my hatchet and flashlight within arm's reach, keeping one hand on my phone. Though I had little signal, the thought of calling for help was comforting even if unlikely to work. Hours passed. The sounds eventually stopped, or perhaps I just fell into a restless, uneasy sleep. I woke suddenly to a loud snap, a heavy thump near the edge of the clearing. My heart jumped. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound, but again, there was nothing. My fire had mostly burned out, leaving only faint glowing embers. The night seemed heavier, quieter, and closer around me, as if the darkness itself was pressing in. I forced myself to stay awake, checking every sound, every shadow. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel something moving, slow and deliberate, at the edges of the clearing. Something about the rhythm of the steps, the way the noises didn't match any animal I knew, made me uneasy. I stayed alert until first light, shivering from cold and adrenaline, watching the faint gray light of dawn slowly spread through the trees. When morning came, I packed quickly, shaking, my hands unsteady, and started back along the trail. I had been planning this camping trip for months. I wanted to go somewhere quiet, away from people, away from cell service, just me, the forest, and the sky. I packed everything carefully. A sturdy tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, a portable stove, food for several days, water purification tablets, a small first aid kit, a headlamp, and a few spare batteries. I also brought a map of the area, though I had no intention of following any marked trails. I wanted to find a spot deep in the woods, where few people went, and where I could truly feel the solitude I craved. I arrived at the forest late in the afternoon. The sun was already low in the sky, and the trees cast long shadows across the uneven dirt road. I parked my car on the side, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and started walking. The forest smelled damp and earthy, with the faint hint of decaying leaves underfoot. I followed a small stream at first, enjoying the sound of the water running over rocks. Birds were quiet, as if they sensed the coming night. Every step I took, I felt the thickening isolation, the way the forest seemed to close in around me. After about an hour, I found a clearing that felt right. It wasn't too big, just enough for my tent and a small fire pit. The ground was soft, covered in a layer of pine needles and dry leaves. I could see the stream a short distance away, which would give me water if I needed it. I set up my tent quickly, checking that the rainfly was secure, pegging it firmly into the ground. I stacked some wood nearby for a fire and made a small ring of stones to keep it contained. The air was already cooling rapidly, and the shadows deepened. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple before disappearing entirely. By the time I got my fire going and started cooking a small meal, the forest was silent except for the crackling of flames. The smoke mixed with the cool night air, and I felt a brief, satisfying warmth as I ate. The first night in a place like this is always a mixture of excitement and unease. Every rustle in the bushes or crack of a branch makes you jump, even if you know it's just an animal. I kept my knife close and my headlamp within reach, telling myself it was only precaution. I went to bed early, listening to the wind in the trees, letting the solitude sink in. It was peaceful, but I was aware of the vulnerability of being alone in the dark. The next morning, I woke to mist rising from the stream. The air was damp, cold, and smelled like wet earth. I made coffee on my portable stove and watched small birds flit among the trees. I decided to explore the area further before the heat of the day made it uncomfortable. I hiked along a narrow path I found, stepping carefully over roots and loose rocks. The forest seemed endless, with trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. Every so often, I would catch sight of a deer moving silently in the distance, its brown eyes reflecting the morning light. I kept track of landmarks, knowing that I would need to return to my tent before dark. By midday, I had wandered far from my clearing. I came upon an old, abandoned campsite, ashes of a fire long gone, a torn tarp still hanging on a tree, and some rusted metal cans scattered around. It gave me an uneasy feeling. Someone had been here recently, or at least in the past months, and I wondered why they left. The forest felt different here, less safe, almost like it was warning me to turn back. I didn't linger. I marked the location on my map and started heading back toward my own site. The following night, things began to feel different. Around midnight, I woke to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the trees, but then I heard it again. A low, crunching sound, like someone walking slowly through the dry leaves around my tent. My heart started pounding. I stayed still, holding my knife, straining to hear. The sound continued, circling my tent. I realized it wasn't random. Someone, or something, was moving deliberately around me. I could see faint shadows through the fabric of the tent, shapes that should not have been there. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the steps were too heavy, too precise. I spent the rest of the night in near constant fear, holding my knife and flashlight, listening to every sound. The next morning, I packed cautiously, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I thought maybe it had been a bear or a large animal, but the methodical movement didn't fit. I decided I would hike further away the next day, higher into the hills where fewer animals or humans would be able to reach me. I had brought enough supplies, but I made a mental note to be even more careful. By the second night, I had moved deeper into the forest, finding a rocky area near a small ridge. I set up my tent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That evening, I noticed fresh footprints in the soft soil around my fire pit, human footprints. My stomach sank. They weren't far from my tent, and they circled in irregular patterns, like someone had been pacing. I checked my knife, my headlamp, and my small hand axe, thinking about what I would do if someone tried to get close. The forest suddenly felt much larger and more threatening. Every sound, the snapping of a twig, the distant call of a bird, made me tense. I tried to calm myself, telling myself to wait until daylight. At dawn, I decided to follow the footprints to see if I could figure out who had been there. I moved quietly, careful not to leave too many tracks myself. The prints led me down a narrow slope into a denser part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. I noticed signs of a makeshift shelter, A tarp hung between two trees, some firewood stacked neatly. This was someone living in the forest, possibly for weeks. I kept a safe distance, observing. The area looked abandoned at the moment, but I had the strong impression that the person, or people, could return at any time. I spent the next day hiking cautiously, staying aware of my surroundings. I noticed other signs. Discarded cans, a broken branch here and there, more footprints. It was unnerving, knowing I was not alone in a part of the forest I had thought was deserted. By evening, I returned to my tent, resolved to stay hidden. I reinforced my campsite, moving my firewood slightly further away from the tent to avoid giving away my location, and ensured that my tent blended as much as possible into the surrounding foliage. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. I wanted to get away from the city, away from noise, phones, people, everything. I packed my backpack carefully: tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, water, some canned food, a first aid kit, flashlight, extra batteries, and my compass. I had been reading maps for the area for days, memorizing trails, rivers, and campsites. I told myself I was ready for anything, but I wasn't prepared for what was waiting. I started the hike mid-morning, parking my car at the trailhead. The path was steep at first, winding through dense forest. The trees were tall and close together, their thick branches cutting most of the sunlight, making it cool and quiet. Birds chirped occasionally, and I could hear the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I felt a strange kind of calm as I walked, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, the air crisp with the smell of wet leaves and pine. After a few hours, I reached a clearing near a small stream. I decided to stop and rest. I filled my water bottle, washed my hands, and sat on a rock. The sun was high, and the sound of running water was soothing. I ate a small snack and checked my map, making mental notes of where I would camp. There was a spot about 2 miles up the trail that looked perfect, on slightly higher ground, near the edge of the forest, and not too close to the stream to avoid flooding if it rained. I packed up and continued. The trail became less defined as I moved forward. I had to duck under low-hanging branches, step over fallen logs, and carefully navigate through thick patches of ferns. The further I went, the quieter it became. Birds seemed to disappear, the wind was soft but constant, and even the rustle of small animals stopped. I reached a small ridge in the late afternoon. From here, I could see a wider section of the forest and a glimpse of the valley below. It was beautiful, but the isolation began to settle in. My chest tightened slightly, a mixture of awe and nervousness. I finally reached the campsite I had marked on the map. It was perfect, level ground, dry soil, surrounded by trees, with a small clearing for the tent. I unpacked my gear and set up the tent carefully, making sure the pegs were secure. The sky started turning orange as the sun began to set. I gathered some dry wood nearby for a fire, carefully choosing sticks and logs that were dry enough to burn. Lighting the fire was easy. The kindling caught quickly, and soon I had a small, warm flame crackling in front of me. As night fell, the forest changed. Sounds shifted. Birds were gone, replaced by the distant howl of a coyote. The wind rustled the treetops above me. Shadows seemed to stretch in strange ways around the firelight. I ate my dinner, a simple combination of canned beans and rice, and sipped water from my bottle, keeping my senses sharp. Something about being completely alone in the wilderness at night makes every sound louder, every movement more noticeable. Around 10 p.m., I decided to crawl into my sleeping bag. I left the fire small, just enough to give light and a little warmth. The first few hours of night were peaceful, the fire crackling softly, the occasional distant animal noise reminding me that I was not alone but also that nothing was too close yet. That calm didn't last. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of snapping twigs somewhere near the edge of my campsite. My body froze. I strained my ears. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate, and closer this time. My heart began to pound. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the surrounding trees. Nothing. The shadows danced in the light, but no figure appeared. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other forest animal. Then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, something moving in the underbrush, closer. I grabbed a large stick from my tent as a makeshift weapon and stood, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The sound stopped for a moment, as if whatever it was had paused. I listened. The night seemed to hold its breath. I slowly circled the perimeter of my campsite, shining the light into every shadow. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing looked at me. But the feeling remained. Someone or something was there, watching. My mind raced through possibilities. Bears sometimes wander near campsites, especially where there is food, but the movement didn't sound like a bear. Bears break branches and rustle the undergrowth noisily, and I would have heard more. This was quieter, careful, calculated. Human. Panic mixed with adrenaline. I remembered reading about hikers encountering other people late at night in remote areas. Sometimes lost, sometimes dangerous. I tried to stay calm. My first instinct was to make noise, to shout or bang on a tree. But then I realized, whatever it was might already know I was awake. Making noise could provoke it. I stayed still, breathing quietly, clutching the stick, eyes scanning the shadows. The snapping twigs started again, now moving around my tent, circling it slowly. My stomach turned. I had left some food in a small bag outside, thinking I would secure it in the tent later. Could it be someone trying to steal it? Or worse, someone with bad intentions? The movements stopped suddenly. Silence, thick and heavy. I didn't dare breathe loudly. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt distorted in the darkness. I considered leaving the tent to investigate, but I didn't want to reveal my position or step into a trap. Then I heard a low whistle, faint but distinct, coming from behind a tree line about 50 feet away. My stomach dropped. That was a human sound. Whoever it was, they knew I was awake. The whistle came again, followed by the faint sound of footsteps moving away slowly. I waited, frozen, listening. After a long while, the sounds vanished completely. I didn't dare move for the next hour. Dawn finally broke, and the forest lightened. I peeked out of my tent cautiously. No one was there. I examined my campsite. The fire was mostly out, the food bag untouched, no obvious footprints, just a few broken twigs where something or someone had moved. I packed up quickly, not bothering to eat breakfast. I took a longer route back toward the trailhead, avoiding the path I had come from. My heart still raced, and every sound made me jump. I kept a firm grip on my walking stick, scanning the forest constantly. After hours of tense hiking, I finally reached my car. The sense of relief was overwhelming. I checked the back seat carefully before getting in, locked the doors, and started the engine. On the drive home, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following. Nothing appeared. I told myself I was safe, but the memory of those night sounds, the calculated steps, the whistle, would stay with me forever. The next day, I reported the incident at the local ranger station. They mentioned that hikers sometimes encounter other people camping illegally in the area. Some were harmless, just wandering hikers, but others had been caught trespassing or stealing from campsites. They advised me to always store food securely and be cautious when camping alone, especially at night. I realized I had learned a valuable lesson about wilderness safety, not just about nature, but about the other people who can be lurking where you least expect. The fear I felt that night stayed with me, a reminder of how quickly a peaceful, isolated place can become tense and dangerous. But I also felt a sense of accomplishment. I had stayed calm, protected myself, and made it out unharmed. I had survived, and I would remember every detail of that night for the rest of my life. I had been planning this camping trip for weeks, telling myself I needed a break from everything. My life had been a constant cycle of work, errands, and small frustrations, and I wanted to escape into the quiet of the forest, away from lights, traffic, and noise. I packed my backpack carefully. A tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, water filter, first aid kit, extra food, and a few basic tools. I checked everything twice, wanting to make sure I had enough for at least 3 days, maybe 4 if I needed to extend my time. The forest I chose was far from any town or major road. It was a national forest that few people visited, mostly hikers who came in the summer. I arrived late in the morning, driving down a long dirt road that twisted through dense trees. As I drove deeper, the trees grew taller and closer together, blocking the sunlight and making the forest feel heavier, almost suffocating. The road became narrow, covered in loose gravel, and I had to slow down to avoid sliding. I could hear nothing but the wind through the branches and the occasional bird call. There was a faint smell of damp earth, moss, and old leaves. I parked at a small clearing I found near a stream, the kind of place I imagined I would have all to myself. The first thing I did was unpack my gear and pick a spot for my tent. I chose a flat area slightly elevated from the stream to avoid any water runoff if it rained. The ground was covered with dry leaves, pine needles, and small rocks. I cleared it as best I could, checking for roots or anything sharp that could damage the tent floor or make sleeping uncomfortable. I laid down a tarp first, then set up the tent, making sure it was taut and stable. I arranged my sleeping bag inside and put my backpack just outside the entrance. Everything was organized and in its place. After that, I explored the nearby area. The stream was small but steady, running over smooth stones and making a soft gurgling sound. I followed it for a short distance, finding a few potential fire pits, remnants of old campers' trips. Most had burned out long ago, with blackened stones scattered around. The forest floor was uneven, covered with thick moss in places and tangled roots in others. Birds flitted between branches, and small animals scurried through the underbrush, but I saw no deer or larger creatures. The further I went from the clearing, the quieter it became, almost oppressively so. By late afternoon, I decided it was time to start a fire. I gathered wood carefully, selecting dry sticks and branches. I found larger logs nearby for sustained burning. I arranged the kindling in a teepee shape and used my lighter to start the flame. The fire caught quickly, and soon I had a steady burn. The smell of smoke mingled with the forest air, and the warmth was comforting against the cool evening. I cooked a simple meal, canned beans and rice, on my portable stove, watching as the steam rose and mixed with the smoke from the fire. Eating outdoors always made food taste better, even simple things. As night approached, the forest changed. Shadows stretched unnaturally between the trees, and the usual sounds of wildlife grew distant. The wind shifted, moving through the branches in a way that sounded almost like whispers, though I knew it was just the trees. I checked my supplies, ensuring I had enough water and food, and then I settled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The first night alone in the forest felt different from any camping trip I had taken before. There was no distant hum of cars, no other campers' voices, just the deep, heavy quiet of the forest and the occasional crack of a branch breaking somewhere in the distance. I couldn't sleep well that first night. Every little sound made me tense, my imagination filling in possibilities. Something brushed past outside the tent once, and I froze, listening carefully. Could have been a small animal, or it could have been nothing at all. I stayed awake for hours, feeling the night press in on me from all sides. When I finally drifted off, it was shallow sleep, full of half-waking moments where every noise startled me. The next morning, I woke early. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening but still vast and isolated. Mist hung over the stream, giving the area a gray, muted appearance. I had breakfast, a simple combination of granola and water, and then decided to explore further along the stream. I walked slowly, taking in every detail, the sound of my boots on the soft ground, the movement of birds above, the small insects crawling on leaves. The forest felt alive in a way I had never noticed before, and I realized how easy it would be to get lost if I wasn't careful. As I followed the stream, I noticed signs of recent activity. Footprints, probably from a deer, crisscrossed the mud near the water. Broken branches suggested larger animals had passed through, maybe a bear or a wild boar. I reminded myself to stay alert. I carried a small hatchet for safety just in case. The thought of a large predator didn't scare me as much as the thought of being unprepared in such isolation. Around midday, I found a small clearing with a fallen tree that offered a good vantage point. I sat there, eating a snack and observing the surroundings. The wind shifted again, and the forest became eerily silent for a few moments. Then, faintly, I heard something. Not a branch snapping, not the usual animal sounds, but deliberate movement. Something was moving through the trees toward me. I froze, trying to locate it. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, but I saw no bright clothing, no gear. Just shadows shifting unnaturally among the trunks. The movement stopped, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence. My pulse quickened. I debated whether to leave immediately or wait and see. My instincts told me to move quietly and carefully back to my tent, keeping my eyes on the underbrush as I went. Step by step, I retraced my path along the stream, making sure not to snap any branches or rustle leaves. Every small noise felt magnified. I noticed a large, fresh set of paw prints near the stream, much bigger than a dog or coyote. My stomach sank. A bear had passed through recently. By the time I reached my tent, the sun was already low in the sky. I reinforced my campsite as best I could, stacking logs around the perimeter of the fire and making sure my food was stored securely away from the tent. I had read that bears could be attracted to the smell of food even from a distance. I also checked my surroundings, noting where I could run if necessary and making mental maps of escape routes toward the dirt road I had driven in on. Night fell again, heavier than the first. I kept the fire burning brighter this time, adding logs frequently. I heard distant noises, branches breaking, leaves rustling, and my body tensed with every sound. The paw prints I had seen during the day weighed on my mind. I knew bears could be dangerous, especially if startled or hungry. I tried to sleep but couldn't fully relax. I kept imagining shapes moving just beyond the firelight, waiting for me to make a wrong move. Hours passed, and the fire eventually burned lower. I rationed my remaining wood to maintain some light and heat through the night. The wind shifted again, blowing smoke in my direction, forcing me to cough and move slightly to avoid it. I stayed inside the tent, alert, listening. Occasionally, I heard thumps against the underbrush or small stones rolling down the stream bank. Each time, my heart jumped, and I reminded myself to stay calm. By the time dawn arrived, I had barely slept. The first light revealed more details about the area. I noticed claw marks on nearby trees and deeper footprints along the path to the stream. This wasn't an isolated occurrence. Bears, maybe more than one, had been moving through the area recently. I packed my backpack carefully, making sure my food was sealed tightly, and then began planning my exit. Staying another night seemed unwise. I moved quietly back along the stream, keeping my eyes on every movement. I avoided areas with thick underbrush where I couldn't see potential threats. After an hour, I reached a ridge I had scouted the day before. From there, I could see the dirt road in the distance. The journey back was tense, every rustle, every shadow making me pause and scan carefully. I kept thinking about how easily one wrong step could lead to disaster in this isolation. When I finally reached my car, relief washed over me. I double-checked the surroundings, ensuring no large animal had followed me to the edge of the forest. I loaded my gear quickly and drove slowly back along the dirt road, constantly scanning the edges of the forest for movement. The sun rose higher, revealing the forest in its full light. It looked peaceful, almost serene, but I knew the quiet held dangers I had barely managed to avoid. Driving out of the forest, I realized how fragile safety can be in isolation. I had underestimated the presence of wildlife and the challenges of being alone in a remote area. That experience stayed with me for months. Every time I thought about it, I remembered the dark nights, the paw prints near my tent, the moments when I wasn't sure what was watching me. The forest had given me exactly what I wanted. Silence, solitude, and a break from my usual life, but it had reminded me sharply that nature does not forgive carelessness. By the time I reached civilization, I felt exhausted but grateful. I promised myself I would return to camping, but with far more preparation and respect for the power of the wilderness. That trip had been terrifying, yes, but it also taught me the importance of awareness, planning, and humility when stepping into an environment where I was not in control. I kept the memories of that night close, using them to guide every future adventure, never forgetting how alone and vulnerable I had truly been. I had been planning this camping trip for months, meticulously checking maps, reading weather reports, and buying supplies. I wanted to go somewhere remote, a place far from cell service, away from any sign of people, where I could be completely alone with the forest and my own thoughts. I chose a stretch of national forest I had never visited before, 100 miles from the nearest town. My plan was simple: hike in during the day, find a clearing near a stream, set up camp, spend the night, and hike out the next morning. I left early in the morning, driving the long, winding road through hills and dense pine forests. The air smelled sharp and clean, the kind of smell you notice when civilization is far behind. I parked my car at the trailhead, checked my pack one last time: tent, sleeping bag, extra layers, food, water, first aid, flashlight, and a small folding shovel, and started down the trail. The forest was quiet. The only sounds the crunch of my boots on the pine needles and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. As I hiked deeper, I noticed how the terrain shifted. The trail narrowed, and the trees grew taller, their trunks thick and rough. Sunlight barely reached the ground in some areas, creating patches of shadow that made the forest feel endless. I passed over small creeks and crossed fallen logs. Occasionally, I would stop to observe animal tracks in the mud: deer, raccoon, maybe even a fox. My excitement grew as I realized how untouched this place was. Around mid-afternoon, I found a suitable clearing near a small stream. The ground was soft, covered with pine needles, and the stream was shallow, clear, and cold. I decided this was where I would camp. I set down my pack, took out the tent, and began setting it up. The tent was small but sturdy, a two-person model I had used before. I hammered the stakes into the ground carefully, making sure everything was secure. Once it was set up, I took a break, sat by the stream, and drank some water, feeling the tension of the hike ease from my shoulders. After resting for a while, I began collecting firewood. The area was rich with fallen branches, twigs, and dry pine needles. I built a small fire pit with stones I found nearby, arranging the wood carefully. Lighting the fire was easy. The kindling caught quickly, and soon I had a steady flame. I spent the next hour cleaning fish I had caught earlier on the hike, a small brook trout I had caught in the stream, and cooking it over the fire. The smell of roasting fish mixed with the scent of pine and damp earth. I ate slowly, savoring the taste, and enjoyed the solitude. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop. I added more wood to the fire and sat close, feeling the warmth seep into my bones. The sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, the sun sinking behind the hills. Shadows grew longer, stretching across the forest floor. The sounds of the forest changed too. Birds quieted, nocturnal animals began stirring, and the wind rustled through the trees in a way that seemed louder at night. After eating, I organized my gear inside the tent. I unrolled my sleeping bag, laid out my flashlight and water bottle, and made a mental note of everything I might need during the night. I wanted to sleep early, knowing that I had a long hike ahead in the morning. Before crawling into my sleeping bag, I stepped outside to look at the stars. The sky was clear, and the Milky Way stretched across it, bright and brilliant. I felt a rare kind of peace, the kind that comes from being completely alone in nature. But as the night deepened, subtle things began to shift. I had been listening to the fire crackle and the water of the stream babble when I noticed another sound. Faint at first, but distinct. A snapping of twigs, not close, but definitely moving through the forest. I froze, listening intently. The snapping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone or something was moving carefully among the trees. My first thought was another camper, but I knew there weren't any nearby campsites, and I hadn't heard any other vehicles today. My stomach tightened. I reminded myself that the forest was home to animals, and many of them moved at night, but the sound was different. I watched from the edge of the firelight, straining my eyes, The darkness beyond the circle of the fire seemed endless, but I thought I saw movement, a shadow between the trees. My heart rate increased slightly, but I told myself to stay calm. I had a knife strapped to my belt and extra supplies in my backpack. I decided to make the fire burn brighter, adding larger logs. The flames roared up, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing, and I felt slightly safer. The snapping continued, getting closer, though still at a distance. I realized I was not going to sleep. I stayed near the fire, my eyes scanning the darkness, every nerve on edge. At one point, I thought I heard a low growl, faint but unmistakable. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear was possible. Black bears were known in this forest, but they usually avoided humans. Still, I kept my flashlight and knife close, and the fire between me and the forest, feeling a primal awareness of the vulnerability of being alone in the wilderness. Hours passed slowly. Every little sound, rustling leaves, a falling branch, the babble of the stream, set my nerves on edge. I remained vigilant, rotating logs in the fire and keeping the flames strong. I realized I could not let myself be distracted by fear, or I might make a mistake. I monitored the wind direction, thinking if a bear was approaching, the smoke and scent of the fire might keep it at bay. At some point, I saw a pair of reflective eyes near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I froze, my body rigid. They disappeared almost immediately, but I could still hear snapping in the underbrush. Morning came slowly. The sun was just beginning to rise when I finally allowed myself to sit down, exhausted but still alert. The night had been tense, every sound amplified in the darkness, and I felt the weight of adrenaline and fatigue pressing on me. The forest had returned to its normal sounds. Birds chirping, squirrels moving in the trees, water flowing. The fire had died down to embers, and I could see the clearing clearly in the morning light. There were no signs of a human presence, no footprints or trash, only the tracks of animals in the soft soil. I realized what I had likely been hearing was a combination of wildlife. Deer moving cautiously, a fox hunting, and possibly a bear wandering nearby. But no predator had dared approach the fire directly. I packed up carefully, making sure to leave no trace behind. I inspected the tent and gear for damage. Everything was intact. I refilled my water from the stream, cooked a quick breakfast, and began hiking back the way I came. The morning air was crisp, the forest alive with activity. My body was sore from the hike and tense from the night, but I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had survived a long, tense night alone, relying only on my wits, preparation, and respect for the wilderness. When I finally reached the trailhead and saw my car, I felt a rush of relief. I loaded my gear, started the engine, and drove back towards civilization. As I left the forest behind, I reflected on the experience. The fear I felt had been real and intense, but it had also been manageable with careful preparation, attention to detail, and a clear head. I realized that camping in the wilderness demanded respect, vigilance, and patience. I hadn't just survived the night. I had learned the value of staying calm under pressure and observing the environment carefully. The memory of the dark forest, the fire, and the mysterious sounds would stay with me for years, a reminder of both the dangers and the beauty of being alone in nature. By the time I reached my home, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I had experienced. I had faced fear directly, without panic, and come out safe. The forest was still there, vast and untamed, but I had left it behind with respect, and that respect had protected me. The fear had been real, but so had my preparation, and it had carried me through the night. I knew I would return someday, better prepared, wiser, and with a deeper understanding of the power of the wilderness. I had been planning this camping trip for weeks. I wanted something far from the noise of the city, a place deep in the wilderness where I could be completely alone with nature. I picked a remote area I had read about online. Dense forest, rugged terrain, and a small lake tucked between steep hills. The idea was simple. Hike in, set up a campsite, spend a few days exploring, fishing, and just being surrounded by the silence of the forest. I packed carefully. A tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a first aid kit, and extra gear in case anything went wrong. I knew this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. The trail was rough, and cell phone service was non-existent. But I liked that. Part of the reason I wanted to go so far in was that there would be no distractions. No calls, no messages, just me and the woods. The hike in took longer than I expected. The trail was steep, uneven, and overgrown in some parts. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, and sweat poured down my back despite the cool morning air. The forest was thick, with towering pine trees and undergrowth that scratched at my legs as I pushed through. Birds called overhead, and I could hear the distant sound of water running, probably a stream feeding into the lake. Occasionally, I would stop to catch my breath and take in the surroundings. The smell of damp earth and pine filled my lungs, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy in slanted beams, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the ground. By late afternoon, I reached the lake. It was smaller than I imagined, but that made it feel even more isolated and private. The water was clear, reflecting the trees and sky perfectly. The shoreline was rocky, with patches of sand and soft soil. I found a flat area slightly elevated from the water to set up my tent. It was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, offering some protection from wind, and had a clear view of the lake. I unpacked my gear and began pitching the tent. Setting up camp always gives me a strange mixture of relief and tension. Relief because you finally have a place to rest, and tension because the forest feels unpredictable. As evening approached, I started a small fire. The crackling flames brought warmth and light as the sky faded to orange and pink. I had packed dehydrated meals, which I prepared over the fire, and I sat on a rock near the water's edge, eating slowly. The silence around me was absolute except for the occasional splash of water or rustle of leaves. At first, it felt peaceful, but as the light dimmed, there was a subtle shift. The forest felt larger, deeper, and more unknowable in the dark. Every sound seemed louder and closer. The branches creaked under the weight of unseen animals, and the wind whispered through the treetops. I reminded myself that it was all normal. Animals moving at night, the wind, but there was a certain vulnerability in being so exposed. Night fell quickly. I lay in my sleeping bag inside the tent, listening to the symphony of nocturnal life. Frogs croaked by the water, insects buzzed, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the darkness. I felt secure in the tent, but my mind kept wandering to what could happen if I was wrong. There were bears in this area, though sightings were rare, and I had taken precautions by keeping food sealed and away from the tent. Still, I couldn't ignore the occasional sound that made my heart rate spike. A rustle behind the trees, the snap of a branch. I forced myself to focus on my breathing and eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. I woke in the early hours to an uneasy silence. The forest had shifted again. It wasn't the usual sounds of night. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness. I got up quietly, careful not to disturb the tent, and looked outside. The lake was calm, reflecting the dim moonlight, but my gaze was drawn to movement in the treeline. Something large seemed to be moving slowly among the shadows. I froze, listening. No branches snapped loudly, no rustling, just a slow, deliberate presence. My mind raced. Could it be a deer or another animal? Perhaps, but the way it moved, almost cautiously, made me think otherwise. I didn't want to confront whatever it was, so I retreated back into the tent and tried to make myself as small as possible. Hours passed with intermittent sleep and frequent glances out the tent flap. When daylight finally came, I unzipped the tent to inspect the area. The shoreline was undisturbed, and there were no clear signs of an animal visit, except for faint tracks at the edge of the forest. I recognized them as large, probably a bear or a mountain lion. The tracks didn't seem fresh, but they were close enough to remind me that I wasn't truly alone. I decided to move cautiously for the rest of the day, avoiding thick brush where I might be surprised. I also made sure to keep the fire going and water within reach, knowing that if an animal approached, noise and light could help deter it. The next day, I decided to explore a narrow trail leading up a hill behind the lake. The incline was steep and the path uneven, but the view from the top promised to be worth it. As I climbed, I noted the signs of wildlife, scratches on tree trunks, scat, broken branches. I kept my eyes open constantly. When I reached the summit, I could see the lake completely, and the surrounding forest stretched endlessly in every direction. The beauty was breathtaking, but a part of me couldn't relax. Being so high and exposed made me feel vulnerable. I spent time observing from the summit, noting potential escape routes and safe spots, and then carefully made my way down. Returning to camp, I felt a sense of accomplishment but also an underlying tension. That night, I slept lightly, my senses attuned to every sound. Around midnight, I woke to a noise unlike before. A low, steady thump somewhere beyond the trees. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and unnervingly close. I held my breath, trying to locate it. The thumping stopped for a moment, then started again, coming from a slightly different direction. I realized I hadn't secured my fire fully. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent, shining the beam toward the edge of the treeline. Nothing moved, but I noticed footprints near the tent. Larger than any humans, wider, with a deep impression in the soil. My stomach sank. Whoever or whatever had come close had stayed just out of sight, testing the boundaries. I grabbed my knife and tightened my sleeping bag around me, trying to convince myself that daylight would bring safety. The following morning, I didn't waste time. I packed my gear quickly, keeping my food tightly sealed and my backpack balanced for a fast hike out. The forest seemed different in daylight, not less dangerous but more understandable. I stayed on the main trail, moving deliberately, eyes scanning the perimeter. Every crack of a branch or distant splash of water made me tense, but I forced myself to keep walking steadily. Hours later, I reached the point where I could see the edge of the forest. Relief washed over me. I was still shaken, but unharmed. I glanced back at the dense trees, the lake hidden within them, and felt a mixture of awe and respect. Nature was beautiful, but unpredictable, and being unprepared could easily turn an adventure into a disaster. By the time I reached my car, my muscles were exhausted and my mind fatigued. I took one last look at the forest and felt a strange gratitude. I had gone far enough to experience isolation and fear, but I had also respected my limits and survived. I drove away slowly, my hands gripping the wheel, replaying every sound and movement from the night before. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also reminded me why preparation, awareness, and caution were essential when venturing into the wild. The story of the forest and the lake stayed with me, vivid in my mind, a memory of fear, respect, and survival. I knew I would return to nature, but never without remembering the weight of its silence and the hidden presence of life moving just out of sight. I had planned the trip for months. I wanted a break from the city, from the noise, from the constant pressure of work and life. I had read about this remote campsite in the mountains that was supposed to be quiet, isolated, and beautiful. The trail to the spot was long, rough, and poorly marked, but that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude, silence, time to think, breathe, and escape. I packed carefully, making sure I had enough food for 3 days, a sturdy tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, a small stove, extra water, and a first aid kit. I carried a backpack that weighed more than I thought I could handle, but I didn't care. The plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp, survive the nights, and hike out, all alone. The trail started easy. Dirt paths winding through thick forest, the smell of wet earth and pine filling my nose. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the wind, and I felt a kind of peace that I hadn't felt in years. Hours passed as I walked uphill, the path getting steeper and more treacherous. I stopped several times to catch my breath, wipe sweat from my forehead, and drink water. I didn't see another soul. The silence was heavy but comforting. Around mid-afternoon, I found a flat clearing beside a narrow stream. It seemed perfect. I set down my backpack, took off my boots, and let the cold water run over my hands. I started scouting the area, making sure there were no unstable trees, rocks, or signs of dangerous animals. There weren't any immediate threats, so I began setting up my tent. The ground was uneven, but I managed to find a decent spot. By the time I finished, the sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the forest. I built a small fire, careful to contain it in a circle of rocks. I cooked some food and ate slowly, listening to the gentle flow of the stream and the occasional crackle of my fire. As darkness crept in, I realized the forest changed. It wasn't frightening at first, just unfamiliar. Every sound was sharper. The rustling of branches sounded louder, heavier, and sometimes, it seemed like the wind itself carried strange whispers. I shook my head. It was just the forest. I reminded myself that. Night fell completely, and I crawled into my tent, exhausted. I lay on my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the forest. Owls hooted, insects buzzed, and occasionally a distant animal screamed. I was alone, completely alone, and I felt both calm and uneasy at the same time. Sleep came slowly. I woke around midnight to a strange noise. It was subtle at first, a faint snapping of a twig very far away. I froze. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a raccoon, but the sound repeated, closer this time. I couldn't see anything outside the tent, but I could hear heavy, uneven steps moving slowly around my campsite. My mind started racing. Was it an animal? Could it be a human? The thought made my stomach twist. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The steps stopped for a moment, then started again, circling my tent. My first instinct was to grab my backpack, get my knife, but I forced myself to remain calm. Any sudden movement could give away my presence if it was a person. The sound of the steps grew louder, closer to the stream. I could hear something drink from it, a soft, wet slurp. My heart pounded. Hours passed like that. Every little sound made me tense. The forest was alive with noises that I had ignored during the day. Branches cracking, leaves falling, the occasional heavy thump. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the fear in my chest wouldn't let me relax. By the time dawn broke, the first rays of light cutting through the trees, I could see the ground around my tent was disturbed. Footprints, large, heavy prints that were too big for a deer. My stomach sank. Whoever or whatever had been here wasn't small. My mind raced with possibilities, all terrifying. I quickly packed up my things, trying not to make noise, and started hiking back the way I had come. Every sound now seemed amplified. Rustling leaves, birds taking off suddenly, the wind through the branches. As I walked, I noticed fresh signs of the creature that had been near my tent. Broken branches, deep scratches in tree bark, and the occasional footprint. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I had no weapons, no protection, just a small knife in my pocket. I walked faster, scanning constantly, listening for the slightest movement behind me. Hours passed. My legs were sore, my throat dry, my mind on edge. I had to keep moving. I told myself that once I reached the main trail, I would find people, safety, maybe even a ranger station. But the forest didn't let me go easily. The path I had taken seemed to vanish in places, overgrown and twisted. I realized I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. Panic rose again. I knew that being lost in this forest could be deadly. I stopped to rest beside a fallen log and tried to plan my next move. I looked at my map and compass, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. The sun was high now, but it didn't help much. The forest canopy blocked most of the light, creating a confusing maze of shadows. That's when I heard it again. A low growl almost behind me, but moving slowly in a circle. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my knife and slowly stood, turning in every direction. Nothing. I started walking again, more cautiously this time, making noise on purpose so that any animal or person would know I was aware. Every step was tense, every breath loud in my own ears. I walked for what felt like hours, desperate to find the main trail. Just as exhaustion threatened to overcome me, I saw it. A clearing ahead with a faint dirt path. I rushed towards it, slipping over roots and rocks, not caring about scrapes or cuts. The path led downhill, wider, clearly traveled by humans. Relief washed over me like a wave. I was safe, at least for now. By late afternoon, I reached a small ranger station at the edge of the forest. A ranger saw me, pale, dirty, exhausted, and immediately helped me. I explained as best as I could, showing him the disturbed campsite and describing the prints. He nodded seriously, warning me about bears in the area that had become aggressive after people left food out in campsites. I realized then how close I had come to a serious encounter with a wild animal, probably a bear, or even a group of bears. They took me to the nearest town, fed me, let me shower, and gave me a place to rest. I sat there, staring at the walls, thinking about how easy it had been for danger to find me in the forest. The solitude I had sought had almost cost me my life. I promised myself I would never underestimate the wilderness again. I had survived because I stayed calm, observed carefully, and didn't panic, but it was a harsh lesson in how unforgiving nature could be. Even now, thinking back, I remember the sound of the footsteps around my tent, the growl in the distance, the feeling of being completely alone, exposed. It was terrifying, but I had made it out alive. The forest remained wild, untamed, and dangerous, but I left it with a deep respect and a story that would never leave me. I had planned this camping trip for weeks, mapping out every detail to make sure I was prepared. The forest I chose was dense and remote, far from any main roads or towns. I wanted isolation, the quiet that comes only when you're far from civilization. My pack was heavy with food, water, a first aid kit, and gear for a week of survival. I had a tent, sleeping bag, and even a small stove. Everything was checked twice, and I felt confident. I had camped before, but never alone this deep in the woods. The first day of the hike was easy. The trail was narrow, lined with pines and oaks, and the air smelled like damp earth and moss. I saw small wildlife, squirrels and birds mostly, but nothing alarming. I took my time, stopping every hour to rest and drink water. By mid-afternoon, I found a clearing with a small stream running through it. The water was clear and cold, perfect for refilling my bottles. I decided this would be my first campsite. Setting up the tent took longer than I expected. I was meticulous, making sure the stakes were firm and the rainfly was secure. I collected firewood, enough for a small fire that would last the evening. The sun was starting to set, and the forest grew darker, the shadows lengthening across the ground. I made a small fire, cooked some food, and sat close to the warmth, listening to the occasional crack of branches and distant calls of animals. At first, the sounds were comforting, a reminder that life went on around me. As darkness fell, the forest changed. The shadows became deeper, and every sound seemed sharper. The rustling of leaves felt closer, almost like something was moving just beyond the firelight. I told myself it was just small animals, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked my surroundings carefully, scanning the trees and the underbrush. Everything looked normal, but the unease persisted. I went to sleep with the fire still glowing faintly, thinking it would keep me safe. Night passed slowly. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an animal, kept me half awake. I didn't see anything directly, but my mind filled in the blanks. By morning, I was exhausted, my body tense from hours of vigilance. I packed up the campsite quickly, eager to move deeper into the forest, away from the lingering feeling of eyes on me. The next few days were physically demanding. The trail grew rougher, and I had to climb over fallen logs and navigate steep inclines. My legs ached, my back ached, and my water supply was running low. I rationed carefully, drinking small amounts and refilling only when I reached a stream. The forest became denser, darker, almost oppressive. It was harder to see far ahead, and every step required focus. One afternoon, as I crossed a shallow creek, I noticed something unusual. The ground nearby was disturbed, as if someone, or something, had walked through recently. The prints were hard to identify at first, but then I realized they were human. They were fresh, not more than a few hours old. My stomach tightened. I hadn't expected anyone else to be here, and the nearest road was miles away. I studied the prints carefully, noting the direction they were heading. It was the same path I was taking deeper into the woods. A sense of caution replaced my fatigue. I moved quietly, trying to remain aware of my surroundings. Every crack of a branch underfoot made me flinch. I kept my eyes on the path ahead and behind, but the trees made visibility difficult. By nightfall, I found a secluded spot for my tent, away from the main trail, hoping to avoid any unwanted attention. I built a fire, but kept it small, just enough to provide warmth. I kept my knife close and my pack ready in case I had to leave in a hurry. Sleep was almost impossible. Every sound made me tense, and I kept waking to check my surroundings. The night was colder than before, and the wind rustled through the trees in a way that made the branches groan. I heard the occasional snap of a stick, always far enough that I couldn't see anything, but close enough to unsettle me. I realized that the forest, which had felt peaceful at first, now felt hostile. It was no longer a place of solitude, but of hidden dangers. The following morning, I moved quickly. My goal was to reach a ridge I had seen on my map, where I could get a view of the area and perhaps find a better campsite. The hike was steep, and the terrain was uneven. My muscles burned, but I pushed myself, driven by the need to gain a safe vantage point. As I climbed, I noticed more signs that someone else had been here. Broken branches, flattened grass, and footprints. They were irregular, as if whoever had passed this way was moving quickly or carelessly. By mid-afternoon, I reached the ridge. From here, I could see a portion of the forest below, thick and impenetrable in places. I paused to rest, my heart still racing from the climb. I noticed movement in the trees below. At first, I thought it was wildlife, but the motion was deliberate and upright. Person moving slowly through the forest. They hadn't seen me yet. My pulse quickened. I stayed hidden, weighing my options. I didn't want to confront them, and I certainly didn't want to follow. I waited until they disappeared from view before continuing. As evening approached, I found another spot to camp, away from the trail and partially hidden by trees. I collected wood and set up a small fire again. I ate sparingly, knowing that I needed to conserve energy. Night fell, and with it came the same tension as before. Every sound seemed magnified. I heard branches cracking and leaves rustling at a distance, and occasionally a deeper noise, like the thud of heavy boots on soft earth. My instincts screamed at me to be ready, to stay alert, but exhaustion made it hard to maintain focus. Hours passed. I stayed close to the fire, keeping my knife and pack within reach. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the firelight. I froze, staring into the darkness. It didn't move again. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more alarming than the last. I knew that fear could make a person see things that weren't there, but I also knew that the forest was unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. By the time dawn came, I realized I had been tense all night without sleep. My body was stiff, my mind exhausted, and my nerves frayed. I packed quickly, knowing that moving in daylight was safer than staying put. I followed a small stream that would lead me eventually to a larger path marked on my map. The terrain was rough, and I had to climb over fallen trees and navigate around thick underbrush. Every step was deliberate, every noise carefully noted.